Not enough. When the beluga captures were broadcast on Canadian television, public outrage was so powerful that in 1992, the Canadian government ended all further beluga captures from their waters. Today, belugas, like those currently on display at Marineland Niagara Falls, are taken from Russian waters, with virtually no regulation on how the captures are conducted. Unfortunately, this brand of preservation can be found over and over again in the annals of the marine park and aquarium business. In 1993, Marine World Africa USA in Vallejo, California, since bought by Six Flags and renamed Discovery Kingdom, sought to acquire 4 false killer whales on their federal permit. But the statutes for capturing dolphins in U.S. waters requires lengthy, expensive studies to ensure their removals will not harm local populations. None had been done for false killer whales in U.S. waters, so Marine World looked elsewhere.
In news of nature and the environment, you've probably seen those dolphin-safe labels on canned tuna to indicate no dolphins were hurt or killed in the tuna nets. What you may not know is the netting of dolphins overseas, especially in Asia, for sale to theme parks can and does result in dolphin deaths, and it's no accident.
In 1978, I was filming spinner dolphins in Hawaii when someone came running up to me and showed me this aerial photograph of a beach full of dead dolphins. It was a place called Iki, Japan, and I had never, of course, heard of that, but I vowed pretty much on the spot that I would go there and I would do everything I possibly could to stop the slaughter of those dolphins. Little did I know what I was getting into, because I was 1978, and more than 30 years later, I'm still going back to Japan trying to stop the slaughter. The Japanese say that the hunt of dolphins is cultural, but the real reason that they do it is for money. The dolphin hunters make a good deal of money off of killing dolphins and selling dolphins to aquaria. After we shot the footage in 1980, the whole world revolted against the killing of these dolphins. And the prefecture, Nagasaki prefecture, where Iki is located, said, no more dolphin killing. The publicity is just too bad. And so the killing did stop, but what happened was that aquarium interests came in and they went to the fishermen and said, get us some dolphins, can you? What happened was that there were 400 or 500 dolphins rounded up and run into the bay, and maybe 40 or 50 of them were taken into captivity and the rest were slaughtered.
Starting in the early 80s, SeaWorld, which had developed a business relationship and a professional relationship with the Kamigawa SeaWorld in Japan, had learned that it might be possible to enter into a business arrangement with the Iki Island fishermen, who had largely phased out the dry fishery because of the negative worldwide publicity in the late 70s, to start selectively driving dolphins, including false killer whales, into shallow water where SeaWorld and other ocean area, including Marine World, could select the beautiful few, the highly cosmetic animals that didn't have the nicks and abrasions that wouldn't look good in public, and then allow the fishermen to slaughter the remaining dolphins and false killer whales. The rejects. SeaWorld and other ocean area, including Marine World, continued to underwrite this dry fishery in order to obtain false killer whales. And it was only when Marine World apparently got some wires crossed in terms of information leakage that the whole thing became quite well known to the public. By the time I moved to San Diego as research scientist, SeaWorld had several false killer whales in captivity that had been obtained through this dry fishery that they stimulated.
When we drive dolphins in, we sell them to aquariums. The price is 300,000 yen for bottlenose dolphins and 450,000 yen for false killer whales. Not all dolphins caught can be sold or are proper for aquarium use. Those that don't go to the parks are killed and the meat is sold. Well, the fishermen would not stop the dry fishery. There would be no way to get dolphins to the aquariums, and also the price of the dolphins would be much higher. The money from the aquariums is one of the reasons that the fishermen continue the dry fishery.
This undercover video shows false killer whales captured in a Japanese drive fishery and destined for marine parks. The fishermen themselves were reimbursed only for their time and fuel, whereas most of the profits went to places like the Tokió-based Delfino Corporation that brokered the animals, and Jay Sweeney, who was often contracted by facilities like Marine World to pack and move them. In the late 80s, Sweeney was asked about his involvement.
I don't work with Japanese fishermen at all. I don't even know who they are.
I was having dinner in Hawaii with a veterinarian who specializes in capturing dolphins for aquariums. His name is Jay Sweeney. And I was discussing with Sweeney the disease among dolphins, and this was just after the die-off of dolphins had taken place along the east coast of the United States, and Sweeney, as a veterinarian, was he was imparting some information to me. But I was also just sitting there at dinner and trying to get whatever information I could out of him. And I mentioned that I'd been to Taiji, and he said, well, I'm going to Taiji in May, next May. So I said, okay. And then what happened is that I went myself to Taiji on the dates that Sweeney had told me he'd be there. And I showed up with my camera, just me and my little camera, and there was Sweeney taking dolphins out of the bay at Taiji, out of the harbor. He was just begging me not to videotape and film him, but I continued to do so.
We can do things together. I can help you, in the years to come. Yeah. And you can blow it right now.
I'm just taking pictures of an event related to dolphins, as I do all over the world.
SeaWorld's effort to bring back the drive fishery was so successful that these Risso's dolphins were destined not to marine parks, but in this case, to the United States Navy.
I have some videotape of you working with Japanese fishermen.
Yes, but that is, the Japanese fishermen are responsible for removing the animals from the water. I am on the scene to oversee that process does not harm the animals, but I don't work with them.
You pay them?
I don't pay them. My client pays a Japanese agent who pays them.
The conservation community challenged Marine World's import permit under regulations of the United States Marine Mammal Protection Act of 1972, which requires documentation that the captures were humanely conducted. Marine World could provide no such documentation. And in the summer of 1993, the U.S. National Marine Fisheries Service withdrew Marine World's permit to import these animals from Japan. Prior to this ruling, however, other facilities like Hawaii's Sea Life Park, the Indianapolis Zoo, Miami Seaquarium, Sea Arama in Texas, Gulfarium in Florida, and the Shed Aquarium had either imported animals from Japan or had permits naming Japan as the collection point. Foreign facilities in Japan, Indonesia, Thailand, Singapore, and Hong Kong were involved as well, and these facilities, as well as those in China, Turkey, French Polynesia, Palau, South Korea, Taiwan, and the Dominican Republic, continue to seek or acquire animals through the drive fishery. Securing dolphins and false killer whales from Japan's drive fisheries was only one of the methods originated by SeaWorld to assure not only a steady supply of these smaller animals, but the larger killer whales as well. Dr. John Hall.
SeaWorld obtained permits from the Fishery Service to import 6 false killer whales in the late 1980s. They sent a capture team to Iki Island, and they caught 12 false killer whales. Numbers 7 through 12 were trucked on a flatbed truck over rough roads from Iki Island all the way to Kamigawa SeaWorld on the east coast of Japan, north of Tokyo. SeaWorld employees then were involved directly in the transport of those 6 false killer whales. They trucked them to Tokyo, put them on a jet freighter, and flew them from Tokyo to Hong Kong, to Singapore, to Dubai in the Arab Emirates, and then from the Arab Emirates to Amsterdam. They were then trucked to the Dolphinarium in Holland at Harderwijk, and they were used as trading material. They put those animals through immense stress in order to avoid Canadian airspace and possible inspection, knowing that they didn't have permits for them. They traded those 6 false killer whales that they collected in Japan for the killer whale named Gudrun.
Gudrun was officially listed on the U.S. federal importation permit as a breeding loaner to SeaWorld. Historically, U.S. capture permits for dolphins or whales required government scrutiny and public input. For SeaWorld, this meant high visibility and controversy. Yet, if they bought killer whales from other facilities or borrowed them for breeding purposes, they could bring them into the U.S. with little fanfare and less regulation. But that was only half the story. Ken Balcom has been studying the killer whales of Puget Sound, Washington for the past 40 years. After the movie Free Willy was shot, Balcom was originally asked to put together a detailed plan for bringing the star of the movie, Keiko, into the United States from his tank in Mexico City. He set out to learn as much about Keiko as he could.
We found that there were 3 conflicting stories on the origin of Keiko. So we went to Iceland and we talked to Johan Sigurjonsson, who's the biologist for the Fisheries Department of Iceland. Well, the response to blow me clear out of my chair was, maybe he's one of the hidden whales. And the hidden whale was what? I asked him, what's a hidden whale? Well, you know as well as I do, Ken, there are some animals that some people doesn't want anybody to know about. And that was all he'd say.
After SeaWorld agreed not to collect killer whales from Washington state waters, they needed a reliable source of killer whales to replenish and fill their new parks. And so they set up an operation in Iceland whereby an advanced team would obtain permits from the Icelandic government to collect live killer whales for export. But because SeaWorld had no U.S. permits for direct importation, they would then fly the killer whales to the Dolphinarium in Holland or to the Canadian Oceanarium at Niagara Falls, and they would stash the whales for months or in some cases years, while back in the U.S., SeaWorld would then approach the National Marine Fisheries Service and apply for permits to import already captured animals for their breeding program, indicating that the source of the original collections may well be unknown to anyone.
According to Hall, SeaWorld officials caught whale after whale in Iceland, shipping them from Reykjavik to marine parks in Holland, the United Kingdom, France, and Canada. And from 1976 to 1978, at least 9 whales were sent directly from Iceland to SeaWorld in the United States. In October of 1987, SeaWorld was back, with Don Goldsberry, Brad Andrews, and Jim Antrim, SeaWorld's then vice president and general curator, operating on an Icelandic herring seiner called the Gudrun. After the 3 men were photographed by the Sea Shepherd Conservation Society, SeaWorld ordered them to leave Iceland immediately, stating that they had only been there to conduct killer whale surveys, even though an exhaustive survey had just been completed, and a holding tank in Reykjavik was filled with water and ready for whales. In the early 80s, Goldsberry built another holding tank with SeaWorld's money in the tiny town of Seyðisfjörður, where the Icelandic killer whales were shipped not only to Europe and Canada, but to South America and Japanese parks as well. According to Goldsberry, these shipments were taking place even without the knowledge of the Icelandic government. SeaWorld's ability to skirt easily around the intent of animal importation laws led to other foreign captures of killer whales and shipments into the United States. It also led to death sentences for others. Junior was a male killer whale. In 1990, Friends of the Dolphins shot this undercover video of Junior and his temporary company of 2 bottlenose dolphins. He and 2 other killer whales were caught in Iceland and flown to Marineland of Ontario. Long after his herd mates were sent to SeaWorld, Junior remained isolated in a tiny tank inside a damp warehouse next to the park. Shy and passive by nature, he was picked on relentlessly by the other whales, so no other facility wanted him. Month after month, year after year, Junior remained warehoused, virtually ignored by park officials, while the park's other whales at least had companionship and physical activity. In April of 1994, after 4 years of isolation, Friends of the Dolphins again shot undercover video of Junior. Barely an adolescent at about 12 years of age, he was alone, lethargic, his spirit broken.
It's clear people are hiding stuff. I mean, they were hiding Junior, the other poor whale that was caught when, 89 or something? Ended up in Marineland, Ontario, and for 5 years was kept in a warehouse in a kiddie pool. And he died. He was never on any record. They reported from Marineland, Ontario to National Marine Fisheries the whales that they had in their inventory, and he wasn't there. He's a hidden whale. He's another one, but he's dead.
By this time, the value of killer whales and their smaller cousins to the captive display industry had escalated. The Japanese drive fishery for dolphins would now include just about any cetacean unlucky enough to swim near their shores, including killer whales.
The most recent capture of killer whales took place when 10 killer whales were unfortunate enough to get near to Taiji, and they were all driven into that same hideous bay that is used for the slaughter of so many dolphins. The Japanese hunted killer whales directly as whales for whale meat for many, many years and essentially annihilated them over the course of decades. So it was a bit of a surprise when 10 killer whales were found rather close to Taiji because so many had been just wiped out in previous years. Of the 10, 5 were taken into captivity, the young females and the juveniles, and 5 were released because these were males and they didn't have any use for them. So that pod of 10 killer whales was essentially wiped out in that event. Even the ones who left had no ability to reproduce.